Hello. So this is on cultural competence in social work. And I made a PowerPoint. So let's see. Standards. Cultural competence and social diversity. Social workers should understand culture and its function in human behavior and society. Recognizing the strengths that exist in all cultures, social workers should have the knowledge base of their clients' cultures and be able to demonstrate competence in the provision of service that are sensitive to clients' cultures and the differences among people and cultural groups. Social workers should obtain education about and seek to understand the nature of social diversity and oppression with respect to race, ethnicity, national origin, color, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, age, material status, political belief, religion, immigration status, and mental or physical disability. Cultural competence requires self-awareness, cultural humility, and a commitment to understand and embracing culture as central to effective practice. So, self-awareness. Social workers shall demonstrate an appreciation of their own culture identity and those of others. Social workers must also be aware of their own privilege and power and must acknowledge the impact of this privilege and power in their work, with and on behalf of the clients. Social workers will also demonstrate cultural humility and sensitivity to the dynamics of power and privilege in all areas of social work. Cross-cultural knowledge. Social workers shall possess and continue to develop specialized knowledge and understanding that is exclusive of, but not limited to, the history, traditions, values, family systems, and artistic expressions such as race and ethnicity, immigration, and refugee status, tribal groups, religion and spirituality, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, social class, and mental or physical abilities of various culture groups. So cross-cultural skills. Social workers will use a broad range of skills, micro, meso, and macro, and techniques that demonstrate an understanding of and respect for the importance of culture in practice, policy, and research. Service delivery. Social workers shall be knowledgeable about and skillful in the use of services, resources, and institutes, and be available to serve multicultural communities. They shall be able to make culturally appropriate referrals within both formal and informal networks, and shall be cognizant and work to address service gaps affecting specific cultural groups. So, empowerment and advocacy. Social workers shall be aware of the impact of social systems, policies, practices, and programs on multicultural clients, populations, advocating for, with, and on behalf of multicultural clients, and client populations whenever appropriate. Social workers should also participate in the development and implementation of policies and practices that empower and advocate for marginalized and oppressed populations. Professional education. Social workers shall advocate for, develop, and participate in professional education and training programs that advance cultural competence within the profession. Social workers should embrace cultural competence as a focus of lifelong learning. So, leadership to advance cultural competence. Social workers shall be change agents who demonstrate the leadership skills to work effectively with multicultural groups in agencies, organization settings, and communities. Social workers should also demonstrate responsibility for advancing cultural competence within and beyond their organization, helping to challenge structural and institutional oppression and build and sustain diverse and inclusive institutions and communities. Language and communication. So, social workers should provide an advocacy for effective communication with clients of all cultural groups, including people of limited English proficiency or low literacy skills, people who are blind or have low vision, people who are deaf or hard of hearing, and people with disabilities. So some definitions. Culture. Culture is the integrated pattern of human behavior that includes thoughts, behaviors, communication, action, customs, beliefs, values, and institutes of racial, ethnic, religious, or social groups. Social groups may include lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender people, people with a disability, older adults, military families, and immigrants, and refugees. Sizeism is discrimination against individuals who identify with and or present as a different sex and gender other than assigned at birth, and privilege conveyed on individuals who identify with and or present as the same sex and gender as assigned at birth. It is a form of sexism based on sexual and gender identity and oppression. It's cultural competence. Cultural competence refers to the process by which individuals and systems respond respectfully and efficiently to people of all cultures, languages, classes, race, ethnic backgrounds, religions, spiritual traditions, immigration status, and other diverse factors in a manner that recognizes, affirms, and values the worth of the individual and families, communities, and protects and preserves the dignity of each. Cultural humility. For development of cultural humility, knowledge, training, acquiring, and use of skills set to be effective, we need to be both aware and attentive to the dynamic quality of culture and be committed to the practice of cultural humility. Cultural humility is an important facet of professional identity that encourages self-involvement and involvement of self through one's professional life. It also includes involvement of the professional's identity that bridges social distance as well as power differential between social worker and client systems. All right. Intersectionality theory. This theory examines forms of oppression, discrimination, and domination as they manifest themselves through diversity components. Components include such multiple identities as race, ethnicity, immigration, refugee, and tribal status, religion and spirituality, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, social class, and mental or physical abilities. So what is micro-practice, meso-practice, and macro, meso, and micro? Macro-practice in social work practice is aimed at bringing about involvement and changes in the general society, such as activities such as political action, community organization, public education, campaigning, and the administration of broad-based social service agencies or public welfare departments. Meso practice refers to social work practice primarily with families and small groups. Important activities at this level include communication, meditation, and negotiation, education, and bringing people together. Micro practice is the term used by social workers to identify professional activities that are designed to help solve the problem faced primarily by individuals, families, and small groups. Usually, micro practice focuses on direct intervention on a case-by-case basis. So, why is it important? It is increasingly important for service providers to respond to the demographic changes in the United States. Social workers must have the ability to adapt and modify the ways they provide services to the ever-changing population around them. Not only does the culturally competent provider have the capability to communicate effectively across the barriers of language and culture, but he or she is more attuned to his or her client's needs. By possessing this capability, one could directly affect a client's treatment and outcome. A culturally competent provider can better assure that a client receives the most appropriate and effective services. So, in short, being culturally competent is good practice. So, examples of cultural competency. So this is something that I saw in the original book on this that I read. So this is what it says. I was first introduced to the concept of cultural competency 20 years ago when I started working in a nonprofit community. I became involved in a domestic violence agency founded in the 1970s by Latina advocates. that provided bilingual services from a cultural perspective. The agency delivered services highly influenced by Latino values and traditions, as they addressed the cultural barriers and challenges Latinas faced when living in a domestic violence situation. When women would call the agency for advice, because they were unable to navigate the system, which was set up to serve women from mainstream culture. The founders of this organization were practicing cultural competency. The experience inspired me to enable me to teach other service providers how to provide appropriate domestic violence services to the Latino community. I share some of the information in a book so this is their thing on it, and their, was with the community of the Latinos. But how different cultures look at different things and help to get through them might be different from the mainstream culture versus their culture. And I actually had to look at this at different cultures when I was taking an ASL class, because for one of my projects, I decided to do the deaf community and religion, and how they looked at religion was much different than mainstream. So, what can you do to enhance your cultural competency in your workplace? It's important to remember that no one can ever truly be competent in any culture, not even his or her own. However, there are ways that one can effectively interact with people from diverse communities and groups. Cultural competency involves the following: exploring your own cultural beliefs and values, being aware of your own worldview, exploring the reasons you feel uncomfortable with folks that are different from you, gaining knowledge of a different cultural practice and worldviews. Push yourself to learn about communities that are different from your own, developing skills for communication and interaction across cultures, becoming familiar with the history of community you work with. If you're working with immigrant populations, become familiar with the history of migration, believing you can serve individuals that are different from you, developing a list of professionals for consultation on multicultural issues, engaging in dialogue with colleagues and continuing to increase cultural literacy, assuming that there is a heterogeneity within an ethnic group. Do not generalize. And when in doubt, ask. There's nothing wrong with making assumptions. There's nothing worse than making assumptions about a group with whom you are not familiar with. So those are just some things that personally I'm working on, exploring my own culture and beliefs, and being aware of my own worldview first while I'm still in college, and then I'm, working through the rest of this list. So thanks for watching.